Hello, diasporas of the world. Thank you for joining us live. In today's Living in Between Worlds conversation, we are going to be talking about partnership expectations. Today we have myself, Nuria, and Sonia. And for those of you who don't know what Living in Between Worlds is, it is a community, a safe and open space for diasporas of the world. If you identify as if like you're in between worlds, for first and second generation immigrants. We are local here in Canada, but wherever you are joining us in the world, we welcome you. This is where we allow ourselves to be seen and heard and talk about things that that might not be often talked about, like our own lived experiences of what it's like to be a first or second generation immigrant, things that our culture brings to our experience, things that living in a different country brings to our experience. So this is where we just kind of lay it all out, and we do these live calls bi-weekly. So we welcome you to join us and and just listen in. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, we welcome you to share it within the comments. Just to know that you are not alone on this journey. So as I mentioned already, our topic is on partnership expectations. So I'm just going to start off our conversation here with asking all of us, what does it mean for you to be in a partnership? Who would like to start first?
Well, I can start playing.
Yeah.
Warming up with the topic, because we end up like talking about things that are so deep. But for me, I could say the idea has changed over time. So I used to think that partnership was something that you cannot break. Like if you are in a partnership, like it's like you're putting your organs on it. Like there is no way that you can break the commitment in a partnership. So it was more about a duty than really the inspiration of sharing something or creating something with someone. So from that space, I didn't want to be in a partnership, because I was like, it's a high price. Like, no, I'm not ready for that. I don't want that. And it's how my family creates partnerships. It's like, you have to be in this partnership forever, because this is how we do things. Otherwise, the outside world is dangerous. So for me, the idea of partnership was terrifying. I didn't know that at that time, right? But now, standing on my 44, I'm like, I cannot conceive life without a partnership for me to grow as an individual. But it's no longer coming from a duty, but from a co-creationship.
I love that. Like the co-creation piece, right? Like that. And I like you have a different definition before and now as well. But Sonia, did you want to share?
Yeah, that was so good. And I think that what you say, that the definition evolves, with our experience, with, learning from ways that didn't work out. And I remember one of my first kind of big realizations I had when I first went to therapy a couple of years ago is that I had this belief that agreement equaled love. And so that like, in order for you to really love someone, I had those two concepts really kind of like enmeshed together, where I was like, well, if I disagree with my parents, or if I disagree with my partner or with whoever, then it means that I don't love them. And of course, it, like you said, it creates this pressure to become to kind of lose your essence in a partnership. And of course, no one likes that. It's like no one likes having their soul, quiet, feeling trapped in that kind of situation. And so for me, it really was all about bringing the desire piece, like Nuria says, like, okay, am I in this partnership because I am wanting to co-create something with you? Is it from a real desire? And then also having the tolerance for being in partnership while having disagreements, and not have that be a threat or not make anyone wrong, and just like navigate that space where you can have some level of tension, some level of like, to not be so threatened. Let's say if someone doesn't agree, and I remember that, I mean, the first few years, just starting to even disagree with some of the things that my parents thought, it felt super unsafe. I was like, oh my God, like what is happening? And now it's like, it's super funny because I'm literally at my parents' house. I'm visiting them today. And it's like, I just feel so much free. And it's like, I mean, my mom's probably like overhearing what I'm saying. And I just feel like, hey, you can have that safety in that disagreement. That's like one aspect, like learning to tolerate that discomfort. But then something else that came in my definition of like partnerships is that it somehow has to feel like you're on some kind of equal footing, in the sense that no one likes to be told by someone else. I mean, when you're like in that power dynamic where you're like, like I know better than you, or like that kind of vibe, for me, like partnership is about kind of like co-creating at a same level. Perhaps each person has their own set of skills, set of talents, things that they like doing, and so on. But essentially, no one's thinking that one person's like morally superior than the other or something. So for me, like that kind of equalness is also something that, in my current definition of partnership, is something that I am preferring a lot these days.
Oh, I love that. I think, for me, the definition has evolved as well. And it's interesting because my definition of partnership is the opposite, or different from what Nuria had started off with. Like for me, I had examples where partnership can be broken. So that's kind of where I kind of grew up, because my parents separated, or they divorced when I was young. So it was kind of like a very like, oh yeah, partnerships, they can be broken. And so for me, I learned to be very independent. And partnerships was actually a very scary thing for me, from that aspect of like, oh, if I'm in a partnership, then that must mean like it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. And if I'm going to put all this work and all this effort into it, and for it to be broken, then I'm not even going to bother with it, kind of thing. And so it was so interesting. And then it evolved into like, as I'm in circles of friends where they're in amazing partnerships, whether it's romantic or even just like as friendships, right? Like I started to kind of see how like my own friendships would be kind of broken as well, right? So it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to give myself this opportunity to be in a friendship and see what that's like. but then there's that aspect of like, I think what Sonia was saying, like you start to lose yourself in it, right? And so that became a definition where it's like, oh, partnerships is where you end up like losing yourself in it. Like you just don't know who you are. Like because there's this, like I had learned that being in a partnership is about agreeing with everything as well, right? And the people pleasing aspect is there. So, and that didn't work for me. That definition didn't work for me. And so now I'm in this place where, and I'm still navigating through this meaning of what partnership means to me. But now it's very similar to what you were saying, Sonia. Like it is there's equal value, right? And similar to what Nuria was saying, there is a co-creation. And I think to even go deeper, like adding another layer, it's like we can be totally separate entities. We just have, and all we need is just one thing that we, I guess, essentially agree on, that we are both focusing on, that we have one intention that we're just focusing on. I mean, I think about even us as a group, we have one intention, and that's all that needs to like merge us in this co-creation, right? And I'm starting to allow myself to see partnership as actually like calling the partnership as a separate entity. Like I'm me, and this person is over here being their own separate entity, and together, like the partnership is what we're co-creating, is the separate entity, and it has its life of its own as well. So it's like we both birth something. And so, yeah, I think that's where my meaning of partnership like comes in. And then when we talk about expectations, this is where then it's kind of like, oh, then what? Like, is there a job role? Is there a job description for each one of us? Or like, how does expectations actually end up playing a role in the partnership? So I'm curious to know what both of you have to share on that.
Well, I oh my God, you brought up so many things, and Sonia as well, in sense of when Sonia mentioned power dynamics, right? Like we live in a system where everything is regulated by the heteronormative way of doing things, where there has to be something so masculine or so feminine, but no, like nothing in between, right? Nothing in between worlds. So on that space, we increase the power dynamic. And it's where the root of the expectation is coming from, because it has to be black and white. And when you say, Vanessa, well, we are two entities, you are inviting to each entity to change. And that's not allowed in a power dynamic partnership, because someone has to be in control. So I think that's why it's so scary for many humans to try to innovate in the way they create partnerships. Because it's like, I'm creating something that is not even written in the book, right? So the other day, well, a while ago, I read a book that is called Relationships. Are You Sure You Want One? That's the title of the book. And at the beginning, the writer said, if you look at the definition of the word relationship, it says, is the distance between 2 points. So the meaning of a language, the meaning of the words are so important, and it sticks so hard in our brain, that is what we end up creating, distance. So that, for me, that was shocking, because I was like, yeah, I'm in a relationship. I'm in a relationship. I'm in a relationship. That means distance, distance, distance. I cannot like break the agreements. And I would like to add another layer that is, it's so rigid, that concept, that there is no room to negotiate nothing. And it's so dangerous, because it's not only your relationship with your romantic partner or your daughters or your parents, you bring that model into the workforce. So when you're sitting on a table trying to get a deal, you go with all of these power dynamics, heteronormative forces, expectation of who has the power here. And when you hear all of these image consultants saying, don't cross your arms because that means that whatever, right? Like, or don't put your hand on your face because you are blocking the communication, and you automatically lose the control of the conversation, and you cannot get the deal and not even try to negotiate. So it's all of this is how to limit human behavior in a really natural way or primitive way of being, instead of doing the role. So what you are proposing, Vanessa, it's extraordinary and so challenging at the same time, because it's not written. It's, you can change. And in that space of changing, you can choose something different. And in the traditional partnership expectation is, no, 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 don't change, stay as it is, and follow the rules.
Totally. Totally. Mary, that was so good. I just wanted to say that, oh man, I had a point in my mind. Yeah, Vanessa, I definitely love this idea of like seeing the partnership, seeing a relationship as a bit of like a separate entity that has its own kind of agenda, its own like evolution and its own life. And as the definition of life, it's like constantly changing as well. And it's really funny because there's a practice that I've been doing I would say like since October maybe. It's like by a psychologist named Dan Siegel, and one of the concepts he taught me that was really useful is that in his kind of meditation there's a portion where it's all about relationships, and he says that it's very important to honor the me as like the individual, honor the kind of like the them, the other party. And then he also kind of like made up this word called MWE, so MWE, which is basically like to honor the integrated kind of combined part. And it's really funny because I've been doing that meditation, like it's been one of my favorite practice for the past few months, and I find it really beautiful to take the time to kind of focus and navigate and honor all the parts, kind of like the me, the very individual, very like rooted in my own kind of thing here, the other person and their own trip, and then the kind of like the newly co-created aspect, and treat it as a separate entity. So yeah, it's funny that you brought that up, because I do think it's a more useful way of seeing things, I think, because like we says like we say, none of the two extremes is, I mean, I don't want to say the word healthy. I mean, none of the two extremes it's that useful, right? On one hand, people who are like, these are my limits, these are my things, you cannot talk to me like this, you cannot do that. At some point, if you're so rigid with your limits, like you will just, never have any friends, never have any businesses, because, humans are kind of messy and imperfect, and sometimes they say things and blah, blah, blah. So if you're too rigid with your own thinking and your own rules, you will not want to create partnership with anyone. And at the same time too, if you're too kind of giving, if you're too if you totally get into the other person's energy, you totally people please them all the time and you lose your essence, that is also not a very useful way, because you're kind of like not honoring the self in you. So I do find it useful to kind of see it as like different entities and then something where you come together. So yeah, I'm kind of like still obsessed with the fact that this is something that we brought up today, because I totally did not consciously think of that. And now I'm like, wow, so such an interesting perspective. But yeah, that's what I wanted to share about that part.
Yeah, and I think it's like what Nuria was saying. It's we've been trained to kind of think of partnerships in these ways where it's very constrictive and there's rules. And even like, I mean, I think for me, when I think about expectations, it's like, where do these expectations actually come from? Is there an actual book, right? Like, is there an actual book that says, oh, if you take on this role, like say in a romantic partnership, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm the spouse, and what comes with being a spouse, and and that was the very thing that I feared, was like being like, I don't like the feeling of being trapped, and that's why I didn't want to be in partnership. So how do I make partnerships work for me? And if the rules that I've adopted doesn't work for me, then I'm never going to be able to see myself in partnership. And as human beings, we're meant to co-create, we're meant to collaborate, be in these partnerships, right? So yeah, like, where do we get these expectations from? Like, is there a book? Show me the book.
I think nobody has the book, but everybody talks about the book as a threat. And like there is a book,
Yeah.
you don't know like how big the book is, but it's there, right? And it's scary. And also the book creates so much separation and so much expectation, because let me just share a little bit about one anecdote with my daughters, like as usual, right? I have anecdotes with them because they are these teachers, right? So my eldest just turned 18, and 3 weeks ago, she chose the way she wanted to celebrate. So in her priorities, her mom is no longer fun. Like, it's not like, and I when she told me that, like, okay, my birthday is Saturday, so all day long I'm gonna celebrate with this person, and Sunday I'm gonna celebrate with this person all day long, and with you, Mom, I'm gonna celebrate 15 minutes on Friday, right? So I just stepped back, and I was thankful, because she warned me, right? 3 weeks in advance, like this is gonna happen, right? For me, it was a big number, right? 18-year-old. And I want her to have the best memory ever, right? So through my lenses, in that partnership expectation that we have, I was like, she's choosing to spend her day with this person. What if that co-creationship no longer work later on the road? She's gonna have a bad memory about this big number. So, right? So I had to step back and say, okay, what would it take for me to make 100 from those 15 minutes I'm gonna spend with her? And then I had a conversation with her and say, you know what? I want you to share with me as long as you want. Because if you don't want me to be in your graduation, it's okay. I'm still love you, and I'm still proud of you. If you don't want me on your wedding, it's okay. If you want to celebrate Christmas on May with me, it's okay. Right? So I feel like that conversation for we both was so liberating, because it's, yeah, we're in the book, right? Says that because I'm your mother, I have that right of being on every single moment of your life. Like, really? No. And at the same time, I told her, that's one thing, but you cannot take away from me the right of being your mom and give you my opinions. Because I sign up to be your mom. And I'm going to say opinions that probably you're going to disagree with. But that's the freedom, right? Of what's going to happen. I don't know. My mom wasn't like that with me, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. But what I know is that now I can expect something new, whatever it is. I'm still a mom, but I'm not putting on her this pressure of put your mom on a pedestal, because now she's an adult and we can have conversations at the same level, right?
Wow, Nuria, that's so powerful. And I love that we're having this conversation like live and recorded, because this is the type of like, this is why we have to like share this, just to allow ourselves to think outside of the box, think outside of these rules, that it is completely possible, that we don't have to like live by the book, because it's those expectations that really limits us to be who we really want to be, right? And that's where the pressure comes in, right? Like of having to follow a set kind of rules, and that's where like our own unhappiness kind of starts to happen, because it's not even something that we really want, but it's just kind of like what's expected of the role, right? So I love that you shared this, and it's so powerful and really inspiring. Like it's radical in the sense of like, what, as a mother, what are you supposed to expect? As a daughter, what are you supposed to expect? It's like, well, what if we don't have expectations, but at the same time, just the expectation of allowing each other to speak and share what's on our heart, right?
Yeah, and just to add there a little bit more, I remember that she said, I'm so mad because sometimes I want to share with you something that I am like experiencing, but because I know that you have an opinion, I just keep that for myself. And I was like, Siri, I get it, right? I get it. I'm inviting you to whatever is happening in your life, share it with someone else if you don't feel comfortable by sharing with me, but it's important for you to share. And it doesn't have to be necessarily to your mom. So it's just creating, and of course there is a part of me that, no, you're my daughter, you were my baby, I changed your diapers, right? Like, but then I was like, there is no freedom. So if I tied her to be with me and following the book, I'm creating that separation. And later on, she's going to hate me, because also I had a conversation with my ex-husband, right? Like, okay, this is happening. I want to know if we can be on the same page. And he said something, Nuria, if you don't allow something to happen, she's going to hate you. And I was like, you know what? I'd rather not to be in some events in her life than having a daughter who hates me. So when I let it go, I was just on that space of I can be an audience to see how my daughters are building up, right? It's their lives. Who I am to say you have to live your life in this way or that way.
Wow. I totally love that, Nuria, and I really like total shout out to you for like having that kind of curiosity and humility to be like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm not sure, like, you're kind of like, I'm making up all these decisions as I go, not sure what the result is going to be in the long term. You know, you're kind of like, I'm testing this hypothesis. Hopefully they will work out. But to have that kind of like that humility, all in the name of like, hey, let's build something, let's create a new like rule book that is updated, but at least like it's being chosen by me with more consciousness, not knowing fully what the result's going to be, but at least, you know, it's being chosen with consciousness. It's updated. It's updated regularly. um but yeah, I mean, going back to, so yeah, I totally love that humility and that curiosity that you have, and I think that's really really amazing and inspiring. But going back to Vanessa's question on like where these expectations come from, I mean, I think it's definitely useful to know where they come from, because I mean, in all kind of self-discovery journey and, you know, getting to know ourselves and deepen the relationship with ourselves, it really does help to kind of know where our beliefs and values and all these things come from, so that then we can kind of like take ownership, right? To be like, hey, you know, that is one thing that, like, let's say my mom taught me. I like that one. I'm going to keep it, fine. That other thing, you know, I heard it from her, not sure it serves me in this moment, I'm not gonna keep it, and you know, and so on. But I do think that definitely like family, you know, the family, the people that we grew up with are definitely one big source, you know, given that as children we're so like easily how do you say, like impressionable kind of thing, you know. As kids we basically just like absorb everything and we take it for like as a fact right away kind of thing, and just sometimes we learn just by observing. So I think a lot of these expectations is just there's like a sense of safety associated with certain things, and so we just think that, oh, you know, we have to keep going, like let's say like that whole thing on like equating agreement with love. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess it feels safer if we all agree and we don't have to experience the discomfort and the cognitive dissonance of disagreeing and so on. So because that's safer, that's easier, just people go with that. It's a lot harder to start writing your own rule book where you have all the nuances and all the things where you're like, you know, I can be in the space of this when this thing happens, and you know, this one thing is a deal breaker for me, but this one other thing, you know. But it's really hard, and I think most people don't sit down and kind of write. You know, they don't sit down and think about these things really hard, because it takes a lot of time and effort from a lot of discomfort and, you know, cognitive dissonance to really like choose and pick, like, you know, what are your expectations, what are, and you know, update them regularly too, because we all change, like as you know, as we grow and so on. So but I mean, for me, I think it's definitely totally worth it to explore these questions, especially if you say like Vanessa was saying, like sometimes when we have this like unexamined, let's say, beliefs or fears around partnership, uh it sucks because sometimes it prevents us, like you said, from connecting with others, which is such a human need, right? And we learn so much from others. we grow. I mean, relationships are really like the biggest, I don't know, capital like that we have. And yeah, when we're too uncomfortable to even look at our beliefs and our values around these things, yeah, we might be missing on an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, I think that's like I want to add as well, like I want us to point out that we're not shitting on the rule book, this imaginary rule book or anything. Like I think for me, it's very much like it's there for a purpose. Like it actually is great starting kind of framework. At least that's how I like to think of it. It's like it gives us a guideline of like, okay, this is where we can start from. And then, yeah. And I think that's why, like in partnerships, like communication is so key. Like Nuria had exemplified, like you have to talk to the other partner, right? Like, cause this is where we get caught up is like, we have or at least for me, I get caught up is like these expectations then turn into assumptions and we're not talking, right? It's just an assumption that that's there. And then when it doesn't happen, it's kind of like, well, what happened, right? Well, we didn't actually communicate that. We didn't actually like co-create and actually like agree on that this is actually the same meaning for me. And yeah, so Nuria.
Yeah, and I would like to make the conversation even way more spicy now for what I'm going to say. And I want to talk about like romantic relationships, romantic partnership expectation, where culture influences heavily the way that you're going to build up that partnership. So I'm in my second marriage, right? Like my first marriage, I was married for 16 years-ish. I'm Mexican, he's Mexican, and it's still we struggle because we both were following the same book, right? So it was crazy. My husband now, it's Canadian. We're a blended family, and I can see how much culture put on us distortion glasses to perceive reality differently. About food, about the way we are raising our kids, the way we show up, the way people see us. So I remember one day we went to a restaurant because I'm familiar with all of these minorities and immigration, and of course it's my life. It wasn't his life. And I say I wasn't because today is part of his life. So one day we went to a restaurant and I told him, look at how people are looking at us. Because it was he and his two kids, me and my two daughters. And you can tell that his kids are not mine and my daughters are not his. Like, so people were like, like eating, but at the same time looking at us, keeping an eye on us, like trying to figure it out. Like, is she? Who is she? Probably, no, she's not. Maybe she's the lover. All of these, right? Or like she wants his money. I don't know. Like all of these things, the stories that we create, right? And he was like, he never experienced that sense of going out and start like being seen by someone else in that way. So I said, yes, and wait till we cross the border together, because you'll see, I'm going to go first to show my passport. They're going to ask me questions, and you're going to see the difference once they find out that we're married. All of that influence our daily lives. And now I'm talking about two different books, the Canadian book and the Mexican book, of the expectation of how we're supposed to build up our relationship from respecting our own cultures individually learning, breaking up those cultures, and at the same time understanding that this is our second round, you know? We're in a different moment in life. And that's another layer between my daughters and him, his kids and me. There are other partnerships, other expectations.
Oh, that's so good. You had me
No.
thinking about my partnership, my romantic partnership. He's Canadian as well. And it's like, yeah, when we first started dating, it was kind of like there's this expectation of like, yeah, in Asian families, it's a very big thing. You come to all dinners. And when he said, no, I'm not going to dinners, it's like, what do you mean? No, like, no, you just can't, right? Like it's it's disrespect to the family, right? Like not showing your face and yeah, so it's so interesting how culture does play a role in your expectations of being in a partnership. I mean, that's all shifted. Like we've, redefined what that means. But I think that's where it's like, it's really important to acknowledge each of our backgrounds and, the definitions that we come into the partnership with. Yeah.
Oh my God, that is so good. And I had not realized that actually we're all like in partnerships with like Canadian with Canadian, like my husband is Canadian too. And it's so funny that you mentioned this whole thing on expectations in partnerships, because literally I'm like living this today, that I decided to come visit my parents, and that too, it's still something that like even for my mom, who's like literally to me, she's totally like, but why didn't he come though? I'm like, he wanted to, live his trip and like do his things. And I'm like, totally fine with that. And I totally love, coming to see my family and speaking in Spanish like super quickly and being like, and like being super like that. But she's like, but is he okay? Like not coming? Kind of like totally like try. And it's like, it's so funny because she knows. And I'm like, I have explained to my parents, I'm like, listen, we're really good having our own rules on like, we do a lot of things together. We have businesses together. We have many interests together. And also we love having, our own spaces and taking time like that. But it was so funny, kind of like the disconnect and being like, but doesn't he want to come later maybe? Or like, and I'm like, no. And so it's so funny because like what you said, Vanessa, it's like for your partner, it's kind of like, well, of course I'm not coming to every dinner. And it's like, that's super natural. That's like a natural thing in someone else's rule book, right? And it's what's really funny, it's how for every person, for every culture, our rules seem like our own rules always seem like so obvious and factual, and like, duh, of course these are the rules, which is why, we go back to the idea of like, no, you really have to spend that time and energy, you know um, breaking things down and getting really specific sometimes, because it's sometimes you have to get super specific with some of these things. So and yeah, and that takes time, and it takes effort, and sometimes takes discomfort, right? Because sometimes when you're so caught up in your rule and you think that that is like the ultimate rule that everyone should follow, then sometimes you're afraid. You're like, are they gonna want to follow my rule? And do I have something to lose here, or blah 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 blah? So it can be really this like uncomfortable, but I think we become better in relationships, both romantics and business and all of that, when we learn to communicate. And I think big part of the communication, it's number one, figuring out like what you want, what you need, what you prefer, whatever, and then finding a way to kind of communicate that from I like to say from like a clean place. And by that I mean from a place where you're not so like putting your whole life and emotional well-being on, when you're not putting all your emotional well-being on the outcome of that decision. Because it's funny, these things of like asking for what you want also come up in like in business. I find like romantic relationships and business can be really similar in the sense that sometimes you have to like, you know, you have to make an ask and you're like, okay, are they going to say yes, are they going to say no? And then you have to manage the reaction that comes, you know, which way or another. So but yeah, it's so funny that the cultural thing can be a source of a lot of growth, a lot of misunderstandings sometimes, a lot of but I don't know, I love it. I kind of I love being with someone that doesn't have the same brain as me. I find it fascinating. Like sometimes on the spot I get kind of like, what, like how can you not think this the same way? And then I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I learned something new, like look at that.
Yeah, totally. It helps us to have a different perspective on things, that there is more than one way to look at something, right? And I think that you know, you touched on a really good point. Like that's the beauty of being in a partnership, is that you get to learn things about one another and be able to kind of open your mind up to receiving more. Yeah, I just, because I want to be mindful of our time. Like again, this is another topic where we could do like part 2, part 3, part 4, you know, like I think we're, you know, something that you had mentioned, Sonia, like the communication piece, right? Like maybe just to leave off our audience with kind of something that we can all walk away with. Like, in what ways have you, like, what's one way that you found has like really worked for you in a partnership? Like whether it's in communication and being specific as to kind of like in what way has it worked for you, and just offering that as another perspective as well, for all of us to walk away with. What would it be?
I would say for me, and it's the way that I guess I live my life lately, is nothing is forever. And it's how I really start my day. Whatever is happening today is not going to last forever, whatever it is. And I guess the more I am willing to let go the partnership, the more I learn and the more we stick together. Because it's not my daughters or my romantic partner or my business partner. They are not my property. They are not an extension of me. So when I am on that space, it's okay, this doesn't last forever. And Sonia mentioned something really valuable for me, that is, let's review the agreement once in a while. Because in 1 year, we no longer will be the same people. Let's see if the agreement still works. If not, let's change it. But for me, it's coming from, I'm willing to let it go.
I just wanted to share also something really quickly that I have found useful. To I think something that I really learned during the pandemic is to be okay at the fact that as humans we need multiple sources of partnership in life. Because I find during the pandemic, sometimes, you know, the people with whom we live with became a little bit, you know, yoga studios are closed, you can't go see this person, and so the person that lives with you, with, you know, for many people might be their romantic partnership, but I'm sure this probably even happen with people who live with roommates or other kind of partnerships like that. The people who live with you kind of become this person that's there for you, and I think as a society we had no choice but to kind of like really, you know, connect with the other person, and in many ways that was beautiful. In some ways it was also really hard, because I think as humans we are designed to have multiple relationships and every person brings something different to the table. So I think for me, my kind of piece of wisdom that I have learned is that don't make it wrong, or make it okay for you to have multiple partnerships in terms of like friendships, in terms of, you know, different connections. And sometimes not everyone needs to be at an equal footing. Like I see a relationship, like a yoga studio can be a relationship for you too. You go there, you go to your class, you do your thing. That's an energy kind of exchange that takes place there. So don't not put any relationship on a pedestal, right? I know it was Valentine's Day this week. The kind of the putting on a pedestal of romantic relationships of a certain way, and you should celebrate it and so on. It's like, don't pay so much attention to the noise. If you like Valentine's Day, fine. If you don't, whatever. But for me, it's like, be okay with the idea that it's okay to have multiple partnerships in various forms, and honor that variety.
Oh, so good. I mean, just those two pieces there, like just, oh, so good. I'm gonna definitely have lots to walk away with just there. Thank you for offering that. Yeah, for me, I think it's what I'd like to leave, like, you know, I agree with both of you. I think for me, one thing to walk away with is like just always coming back to checking in with yourself. And for me, that's been a really big thing for me this last few months, is like, oh, actually, what is it that I truly want? Like doing the check-in of like my own definition of like, hey, wait a second, am I actually doing this because I think I should be doing this? Or am I doing this because I truly want to do this? And being honest with myself first in order for me to actually have an open dialogue with my partner in any partnership, right? Even in a friendship, it's like, you know, like, yeah, I could say, like, even with a friend, like I could say, yeah, I'll call you back. But am I just saying I'll call you back because like, that's what I'm, you know, normal friendships say, right? Like, it's like, wait, I had to like double check and say, no, actually, I'm not going to call you back, and be like, that's okay. Like, for me to not to call you back, at least not right now or not anytime soon. I'm just going to call you back when I truly, yeah, have that space or presence or whatever my definition of that would look like. So I think that's important to share. So yeah, no, this is so good. And I love what Sonia, you had mentioned about like the different partnerships, and, you know, like, yeah, I love that. Like, I don't have to rely on my partner on everything, right? Like to feed me in that way, feed my soul in that way, right? Like, this is why I can welcome a community of people to be in my space. And I love what Nuria, you had mentioned, because it's like so freeing to be able to say like, yeah, what's happening right now is not forever. So, or what I'm feeling right now is not forever. So this can change, and, you know, the open dialogue will help, right?
Yeah. And also I could add that this could be for another topic, but
Yeah.
that nobody is responsible for your happiness.
Yeah.
So that's why you require different resources, right? To experience life from different lenses. And another thing is like when you said, Vanessa, like checking in with yourself and being really honest to say, this partnership is no longer working. It's not, because also in the book it says forever, right? It's forever. And forever is like heavy. It's really heavy. So, I mean, I've been reviewing many relationships, and I just let go so many relationships that were like relationships for 30 years that were no longer sustainable, that we were keeping the relationship just because we're an example of what a friendship looks like over time. What are you compromising there? So the checking in is like, check on yourself. Is this sustainable? Is this honoring my self evolution or not?
Mic drop. Yes. Sonia?
So good. So good. No, totally. There's so many of this. Well, like you said, there's so many things that are unconsciously put on a pedestal, right? Like romantic relationships already, they kind of like seem to take the kind of like the number one place. But then it's like there's the other rules, like it has to be forever. If it's not forever, then something went wrong, and so on. And it's just like it's so much pressure, and it doesn't allow us to live, like you said, on the day to day, and kind of like that process of like checking in and being like, okay, like if you have that pressure of kind of like, this is something that needs to last forever, and I need to know exactly where I'm going to be, where we're going to be in like 10 and 15 years or 5 years and so on. It's so much pressure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally love that idea of well, your philosophy, Nuri. I mean, like you mentioned the kind of like the kind of like, this is gonna pass, this is not gonna last forever, the feeling, the whatever. But also something else you said in another occasion on like I think it was one of our previous topics on career changes and so on, and you were mentioning how kind of right now you have a work that allows you to kind of live in the present instead of constantly trying to project yourself into the future and being like, where am I going to be for my retirement and so on. And I think that is beautiful. I mean, that presence on a day-to-day basis, that sometimes if we all have all this constant plans and constant expectations and rules and long-term goals that we aspire to, and yeah, it's fine to have goals, it's fine to have some to value some things and so on, but to not, like you said, at what price? To always be checking with yourself, like what is this costing me right now, and be honest with that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so good, ladies. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I invite you, those of you who are watching this, to join in on the conversation. We are going to have a sharing circle, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday on February 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and I've included the link in the description for you to sign up if you want to join us to continue this conversation, because yeah, like we've only scratched the surface here. I knew it was going to be juicy. I knew it was going to be deep. But yeah, like I find sometimes these conversations we could do like 2 hours of this, and I think yeah, it would be easy for us. So thank you to you both for offering your presence and offering your lived experience. And yeah, I look forward to continuing this conversation. So thank you.
You have a great day.
Thank you.